Redlake, Oregon, April 2008. The town of Redlake sat tucked between pine-covered hills and dusty, endless roads that seemed made for racing. It wasn't a place that made the news. It was the kind of town where people waved at each other in traffic, where everyone knew the names of the high school quarterbacks and which café had the best cinnamon rolls. And it was home to Ethan Ward, a golden boy with oil-stained hands and a mind built for business. Ethan had taken a childhood obsession with motorcycles and turned it into something real. Velocity Cycle Works, a buzzing hub for speed junkies, hobbyists, and weekend warriors. He was charismatic, sharp, and fearless. The kind of man who could turn $5 into $500 if you gave him an afternoon and a cup of black coffee. His mother, Ruth Ward, was proud in that quiet, old-fashioned way. The kind of woman who brought her son sandwiches at work and handled his bank deposits just to feel useful. She didn't need to. Ethan had it all under control, but she loved being part of his world. The shop itself was a second home. Tucked on the edge of town near the freeway, Velocity Cycle Works had a gleaming black awning, an open floor plan full of Suzukis, Kawasaki's, and the smell of polish and ambition. Ethan ran it with his best friend, Brandon Lewis, who had left a steady paycheck behind to join him. "You're crazy," Brandon had told him when Ethan pitched the idea 2 years earlier. "Crazy like a fox," Ethan grinned, "trust me." And Brandon had. Together with Caleb Shaw, the soft-spoken mechanic everyone in town trusted with their engines, they turned Velocity into a local icon. Business boomed. Riders came from 3 counties over to browse the selection and pick Ethan's brain. In the spring of 2008, life seemed perfect. Melissa, Ethan's wife, was glowing. She had just found out she was pregnant. She told him one Sunday afternoon while visiting her brother in Eugene. She had slipped away to a drugstore, taken the test in a stranger's bathroom, and screamed with joy. "I swear the whole neighborhood heard me," she would later say. "And when I told Ethan, his face, God, I'll never forget it, like he'd been waiting his whole life for that moment." They had names picked out. A spare room filled with soft toys and catalog pages torn from baby magazines. The future was ready to begin. But it never got the chance. April 14th, 2008, 2:27 p.m. The day started slow. Rain clouds hung low but never spilled. Ethan called Melissa around 2:15. "Nothing big today," he said. "Just routine. I love you." "I love you more," she replied. That was the last time she would hear his voice. Brandon wasn't even supposed to be at the shop. He had taken the day off to go camping with his brother and nephews, but a last-minute issue with a customer's bike brought him in. The man had complained something wasn't done right, and Brandon, loyal to a fault, agreed to check it out. That man, the disgruntled customer, would become one of the last people to speak to Ethan alive. Just minutes after Brandon arrived, Ethan's old friend Daniel Null called, asking if he could stop by. Ethan said yes. Null was only 7 minutes away. That's all it took. 2:34 p.m., the massacre. When Null pulled into the gravel parking lot, he thought he was walking into a prank. Ethan was on the ground near the shop's entrance. Brandon slumped behind the checkout counter. Null laughed nervously. "Come on," he said, nudging Brandon's leg with his boot. "You guys messing with me?" Brandon didn't move. The blood didn't look fake. And then Null noticed Ruth sprawled near the back office and Caleb face down by the service garage, both with gunshot wounds to the chest and head. 4 people, shot point blank, broad daylight. There was no sign of a struggle, no alarms, no survivors. The scene was surgical. The killer hadn't taken anything, not money, not bikes, not even keys, just lives. The news breaks. Melissa got the call just after 3 p.m. It wasn't from police, it was from one of Ethan's vendors. "I can't get to the shop," the woman said, her voice shaking. "There are roadblocks, sirens. I think there's been a shooting." Melissa called Ethan, over and over. His phone rang, then went to voicemail, then stopped ringing altogether. She drove to the shop. A family friend met her there, his face pale, eyes rimmed with tears. That's when she knew this was no accident, no misunderstanding. Ethan was gone. Redlake reels in horror. The murders hit the town like a meteor. People cried in church pews and left flowers at the shop gate. The sheriff's office formed a task force. State agents were called in. A sketch artist released a drawing of a man in a leather jacket seen loitering in the showroom, someone who didn't know how to mount a bike and didn't seem to belong. But there were no fingerprints, no weapon, no motive, no answers. Days turned to months, then years, and the killer walked free. Redlake, Oregon, 2008 to 2021. The spring rains came and went. Flowers bloomed in Redlake, but something darker had rooted itself in the town's soil. It clung to people's ribs, their thoughts, their prayers. The Velocity murders weren't just a tragedy, they were a wound that refused to heal. Redlake had lost 4 of its own in one afternoon. Ethan Ward, Brandon Lewis, Ruth Ward, and Caleb Shaw. The funerals were back-to-back, a grim procession that left the town numb. People brought casseroles, hugged strangers, and whispered theories in parking lots. The sheriff's office released a composite sketch of a man seen at the shop that day. He had worn a leather jacket despite the heat and had seemed out of place. Someone who didn't know a carburetor from a clutch. Rumors spread like oil on concrete. Maybe it was a drifter, maybe a jealous competitor, maybe it was personal, but nothing ever stuck. The case grows cold. For the first 6 months, investigators treated the case like wildfire. Leads were chased across county lines, phone records were combed, DNA samples were tested and retested, but nothing useful surfaced. The man in the leather jacket? No match in any database. The disgruntled customer polygraph question cleared. Even Daniel Null, the man who discovered the bodies, was interviewed multiple times. He'd kicked Brandon's leg thinking it was a prank. That detail haunted him. He'd wake up sweating, hearing the echo of his own voice, "You guys messing with me." By 2010, most of the task force had been reassigned. New cases took priority. Budget cuts meant fewer hours for cold files. Ethan's photo still hung on the corkboard, but the hope was fading. For Melissa, every day was a quiet form of hell. She had miscarried shortly after the funeral. Stress, doctors said. Grief, her heart knew. She moved to Eugene but kept her last name Ward. She couldn't let go, didn't want to. Every year on April 14th she returned to the empty lot where the shop once stood. Someone had torn it down in 2011. The foundation was still there, cracked and stained. She'd sit on the steps and talk to Ethan. About the baby they never met, about the justice they never saw. The town tries to move on. Redlake rebuilt, but not quite the same. A coffee house opened where the shop once stood. People avoided sitting near the rear wall where Ruth had been found. The older generation still remembered. The younger ones heard stories. And like all unsolved tragedies, the Velocity murders turned into legend, a kind of urban myth with real blood behind it. Some said the killer had fled to Mexico. Others whispered about hitmen, but the truth was simpler and more terrifying. Whoever had done it was still out there. New disappearances. In the summer of 2020, Redlake faced a different kind of darkness. A married couple, Aaron and Megan Heller, both with histories of substance abuse, vanished without a trace. At first people shrugged it off. Maybe they'd skipped town, maybe it was the drugs. But in May 2021, another pair disappeared. This time it hit closer to home. Lily Grant, a 29-year-old bartender known for her loud laugh and dyed pink hair, stopped answering texts. So did her boyfriend, Charlie Dean. Lily also worked part-time cleaning vacation homes and abandoned properties for a local real estate agent. His name, Damon Keller. Damon had lived in Redlake for about a decade. On paper, he seemed like the American dream, owned a 20-acre property outside town, worked in real estate, helped develop new housing on the outskirts. Tall, quiet, always polite. He told police Lily and Charlie had helped him clear brush on his land for a couple hours. That was it. He even waved them goodbye. But their phones told a different story. Digital breadcrumbs. Charlie's last location pinged from Damon's land at 4:36 p.m. Lily's phone stayed active until nearly 10 p.m., all from the same location. Texts she never answered, calls that rang but weren't picked up. Redlake police handed the case to state investigators. And then came the discovery. Damon Keller was a registered sex offender, convicted as a juvenile in Arizona for the kidnapping and assault of a neighbor girl when he was 15. He had served 14 years, paroled, moved north, started over. Or so everyone thought. A search warrant was issued. One team approached Damon's house. Another headed for the property, overgrown fields, a small pond, and several outbuildings, including one old shipping container near the edge of the woods. What they found inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The container. Lily was alive. She was chained by the ankle to a steel bar bolted into the wall, her wrist bruised, her voice hoarse, but she was alive. She screamed when the door opened, then collapsed sobbing when the deputies shouted their names. "Charlie?" one of them asked. She shook her head. "He shot him 3 times in front of me, then dragged him away. I never saw him again." She had been there for nearly 2 months. Lily's rescue would lead to the unraveling of not just her own nightmare, but a deeper, older horror Redlake had long buried. Because Damon Keller didn't just kidnap Lily, he had killed before, and he was about to confess to something that would blow the Velocity case wide open. Redlake, Oregon, May 2021. The inside of the container smelled like rust, mold, and fear. Deputies cut through Lily Grant's restraints with bolt cutters. Her ankles were raw and bleeding, her voice almost gone. She winced at the sunlight, the first she'd seen in nearly 60 days. They wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to a waiting ambulance. EMTs worked quickly. An officer held her hand. She wouldn't let go. Her words came out in gasps. "He killed Charlie, 3 shots. He wrapped him in a blue tarp, took him with the tractor, said the dogs would never find the bodies, said he used red pepper." As the ambulance sped off, state investigators searched the rest of the property. Near the edge of the woods, buried beneath loose soil and broken branches, they found Charlie Dean's body. Nearby they found something else. 2 more graves. A man and a woman, both decomposed beyond recognition. Later dental records would identify them as Aaron and Megan Heller, the couple who had disappeared the year before. Lily hadn't just survived, she had cracked open a killing field. Questioning Damon Keller. At 7:42 p.m., Damon Keller sat across from lead investigator Rhonda Nguyen in a fluorescent-lit interrogation room, calm, composed, still wearing his boots. "We found Lily," Nguyen said. He blinked. "Is she okay?" "She says you shot Charlie." He tilted his head. "That's not what happened." Nguyen pushed a folder across the table. Photos, shovel marks, the container. Damon studied them. "I want a lawyer." But within an hour something shifted. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was control. Maybe he just wanted to brag. "I didn't mean for Charlie to die," he said. "I was just trying to scare them, but she started screaming and, well, things got messy." He leaned back in his chair. "She's lucky. I almost shot her too." That night, Damon was booked for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and 3 counts of murder. But Lily had more to say. A chilling confession. 2 days into her hospital stay, Lily sat with Detective Nguyen. She looked pale, fragile, but her eyes were clear. "There's something else," she whispered. "Something he told me." Nguyen leaned in. "He said he killed people before. Years ago, back when he first moved to Redlake. He said he walked into a bike shop and shot everyone inside, just left, and they never caught him." Nguyen's breath caught. "Did he say where?" "Yeah, it was called Velocity. Velocity something. Nguyen didn't blink. Velocity cycle works? Lily nodded. Nguyen stood up and left the room, connecting the dots. The cold case file had gathered dust for 13 years, but the details still burned like acid in Nguyen's mind. 4 people, shot execution style at a motorcycle shop. No motive, no suspect. Only a sketch of a man in a leather jacket who didn't know how to ride. She reopened the file that night. The similarities were chilling. Keller had moved to Redlake in 2007. The Velocity murders happened in April 2008. Back then he had just finished parole after serving 14 years for kidnapping a teenage neighbor in Arizona. Nguyen confronted him again. This time she brought photos of the victims. He smiled. Yeah, he said, that was me. Why? They laughed at me. I bought a bike from them a year earlier. It got stolen. When I came back for a new one, Ethan and his buddy joked about it. Said, gonna let this one get stolen too. His face darkened. They embarrassed me. So he came back with a .40 caliber handgun and erased them. The sketch. Nguyen asked him about the leather jacket. Oh yeah, he said, grinning. Hot as hell that day, but it made me feel strong. He had seen the sketch. Didn't care. Said it looked nothing like him, and nobody ever made the connection. Until Lily. The town reacts. When news broke that the Velocity killer had been caught, Redlake held its collective breath. Melissa Ward collapsed when Nguyen called her. She had spent 13 years wondering if Ethan's killer had died, fled, or was living next door. Now she had a name, and a face. Damon Keller. She didn't want revenge, she wanted truth, and she wanted him to rot. In the following weeks, Keller led police to more burial sites, one behind his shed, another near an abandoned cabin. The confirmed victim count rose to 7. A survivor's burden. Lily struggled to sleep. She had nightmares of the container, of the dark, of Charlie's blood. Reporters called her brave. Some said she was lucky. I don't feel lucky, she told Nguyen. I feel like I'm still in the box. Nguyen placed a hand over hers. You got out, and you got him. And that mattered. Because without Lily Grant, Damon Keller might have kept killing. Redlake, Oregon, June 2021. Damon Keller had lived in Redlake for 13 years, and no one ever really knew him. That was the part investigators couldn't shake. He wasn't a recluse. He bought coffee at Joe's Diner, voted in every election, attended real estate mixers in town. People described him as quiet but polite, always alone, always smiling that thin, neutral smile. He was just there, said one neighbor, like a shadow you never noticed. But behind that mask of normalcy, Damon Keller was orchestrating a life of cold, calculated violence. The digital trail. In the days following his arrest, authorities secured a warrant for Keller's home, computer, and online accounts. What they found made seasoned detectives recoil. He had left breadcrumbs on purpose. On an Amazon account under the name D_Keller 1978, investigators found dozens of reviews. Not for books, not for electronics, but for tools. A padlock, solid enough to keep even the loud ones in. A folding shovel, easy to carry, works great when burying things. Zip ties, surprisingly strong, won't snap even if they fight. And perhaps the most chilling, a large plastic tarp, perfect size for wrapping someone about 5 feet 10, trust me. Nguyen stared at the screen, her hand clenched around her coffee. He was mocking us, she whispered. He wasn't just a killer. He was proud of it. The interviews. In one of the most surreal moments of the investigation, Keller agreed to sit for a taped interview. Not with a lawyer, not under duress, just him and Nguyen. He looked relaxed, as if talking about his crimes was just another afternoon chore. I'm not a monster, he said. I didn't kill for fun, I killed because it felt necessary. Necessary? He nodded. People don't listen. They disrespect you. They think they're safe because they smile and hand you change at the register, but nobody's really safe. Nguyen watched him carefully. What about Lily? He paused. She surprised me. I didn't expect her to last that long, but she made me feel something. What did she make you feel? Exposed. Nguyen leaned forward. And you hate being exposed. His lips twitched, of course. The psychology of control. Experts brought in to evaluate Keller labeled him a classic sociopath with narcissistic tendencies. He lacked empathy but craved admiration. He didn't want to hide his crimes. He wanted someone to know how clever he was. The murders at Velocity, a response to humiliation. The kidnappings, about ownership. The reviews, pure theater. He crafted an identity, said forensic psychologist Dr. Mara Ellis. A god behind a curtain. He wanted to be feared without ever being suspected. And for 13 years it worked. The community shatters. Redlake turned into a town of ghosts. Everyone began questioning everything. Their neighbors, their memories, their trust. Vigils were held. Ethan Ward's mother, Ruth, had no surviving family. Melissa attended on her behalf, holding a faded photo of the shop's opening day. He died trying to build something beautiful, she said. And Damon Keller, he destroyed it. Caleb's sister, Jenna Shaw, read a letter he had written years earlier about his dream of owning his own repair shop. She broke down halfway through. The courtroom. The trial began in early 2022. Keller faced 7 counts of murder, 2 of kidnapping, and a slew of charges related to unlawful confinement and evidence tampering. He pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. In court, he never once looked at the victims' families. But Lily did. She sat in the front row every day, flanked by officers and counselors. When Keller was sentenced to life without parole, he merely nodded, as if he'd expected it all along. The files closed. Nguyen closed the Velocity case file 13 years and 2 months after it had been opened. She stared at the box of evidence, photos, witness statements, the original sketch. It was never a ghost, she said aloud. It was just a man. A cruel, arrogant man who thought he'd never be caught. But he had been, because one girl survived. Redlake, Oregon, summer 2022. The trial was over, the verdict final. Damon Keller would never walk free again. But for Redlake, closure wasn't as simple as a life sentence. The shadows he cast had seeped into the corners of their daily lives. In the silence of old shops, the wariness in neighbors' eyes, the empty spaces where good people once stood. There were scars that no courtroom could erase. Lily's fight to heal. Lily Grant didn't return to bartending. Her name was now known across the country, whispered on podcasts, dissected in documentaries, praised in articles. They called her the girl in the box. She hated it. "I'm not a box," she said once in an interview. "I'm not what he did to me. I'm who I became after I survived it." She started working with trauma survivors, giving talks at women's shelters and writing a memoir. She called it Unlocked. In her speeches she never mentioned Keller's name. "Names give power," she'd say. "He doesn't deserve that. The town reckons with its past." Redlake did its best to rebuild. A new park was constructed on the old Velocity lot. At its center stood a small brushed metal sculpture, 4 steel figures, backs turned, heads lifted toward the sky. Each one represented Ethan, Brandon, Ruth, and Caleb. At the unveiling, Melissa Ward read a letter Ethan had written just weeks before his death. In it he talked about legacy. "If I ever go out, I want to go out building something that matters." The crowd stood in silence. It was Ruth's favorite kind of day, overcast but calm, with the smell of pine and soil on the breeze. A final twist. 3 weeks after Keller's sentencing, Nguyen received a package in her office, no return address. Inside, a notebook. The handwriting was Damon Keller's. It wasn't a confession. It was a journal, cold, detached. Each entry outlined memories, impulses, reflections. "People are puzzles. I like the ones who scream. Velocity was a test. I passed. They never knew. Lily was a mistake. I grew fond of her. That was dangerous. It wasn't admissible in court, but Nguyen didn't care. She sealed it in evidence and placed it with the others, one last artifact from the mind of the man who had haunted Redlake. She wrote a final note on the Velocity case file. Closed, killer identified, 7 confirmed victims, 1 survivor, and underlined it twice. The legacy of courage. Lily visited the sculpture park often, not always to mourn, sometimes just to sit, to breathe, to remember who she was before the dark, and who she became after. In an interview with a national news anchor, she was asked, "What do you want people to remember about all this?" She looked into the camera, unblinking. "I want them to remember that monsters exist," she said, "but so do survivors. And sometimes one survivor is all it takes to bring the devil down."